Our identity elements. 1. Language. How do we explain our relationship with Central Asia, as our genetic percentage has decreased dearly? We will answer this issue by calling it cultural genetics. The most dominant element of both identity and cultural genetics is language, namely Turkish. If the person who says, "I am a Turk," speaks Turkish, it means that his Turkish identity is strong. 2. Religion. Islam is the second component that strengthens Turkish identity. When a Turk professes, "I am a Muslim," his identity is strengthened. As many social scientists, including Fernand Braudel, agree, the origins of civilization are found in religions. They establish a person's civic affiliation. Ireland is a good example in the narrative. North Irish terrorists, during the Catholic-Protestant conflict, stopped and asked a passerby, "Are you Catholic or Protestant?" The smart young man could not figure out their identity and replied, "I am an atheist." This time, the terrorist questioned, "Are you a Protestant atheist or a Catholic atheist?" This tale is a good illustration of how someone could be a prisoner of the cultural identity they were born into. In order to test the power of language and religion in identity, it is a suitable method to look at Turks who marry foreigners abroad. If a child born from marriage to a foreigner does not know Turkish and learns the language of his foreign parent, likewise, if he takes the religion of the foreign parent, he will assimilate in a single generation and lose his Turkishness. Even if he says, "I am Turkish," future generations will have nothing to do with Turkishness. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the grandson of a Turkish Chankiri Kalfat peasant, is a good example. Take another dimension. What happens if religion and language begin to wear out at home? Take Africa, where imperialists have altered identities, name, language, religion of millions. Take, for example, Japan, Korea, China, and India, where Christianity spreads like wildfire, and its future effects on Asian identities. A third dimension. Think of Abrahamic religions, glues of many civilizations and nation states, weaken and give way to deism, agnosticism, and atheism. 3. Lifestyle. Lifestyle is the third factor that shapes our identity, along with language and religion. Especially for Americans, our lifestyle is like a faith, like a religion. They want to spread it to the world with a missionary zeal. Opposition to it is seen as hostility. Our 90% peasant society's way of life at the start of the Republic was very different from the 93% urban society's lifestyle in 2023. How did the peasant lifestyle evolve into a cosmopolitan, metropolitan lifestyle? What influence does technology have on the unification of global societies? How similar is our way of life to that of the merging global village? Should we completely meld into the global village's lifestyle? How much should we stay as ourselves? How long can we remain unaltered? Take a pen and make a list. Ask yourself questions like a psychiatrist wants you to ask yourself. Which values would you like to preserve that you think make you a Turk? Which values do you think distinguish you from others? Why would you want to stay Turkish? Do you want to stay Turkish? Questions which would create storms in your brain. Serious questions to be composition subjects in our schools. National dream. Behind language, religion, and lifestyle, shared ideals ranks fourth among the factors that define us. Take a community spiritually torn apart, where political hatred and enmity have skyrocketed. What common ideals can they share? If your political opponents do good things for Turkey, will you deny yourself the joy of your country's success stories? Will you be unable to share the joy due to your political animosity? A nation without common values cannot have common ideals. Ask yourself, in 50 years, what kind of Turkey do you want to leave for your grandchildren? How realistic are your dreams? What will you do to realize them? What sacrifices are you ready for the lowest common denominators of your nation, without blaming others, but they should also. The old values are so thoroughly worn out that we have a tough job ahead of us in making up our minds for new values. Then, ideals. Our lumpens transforming from peasantry to a new bourgeois class will learn to respect their compatriots in time, and then will come the common ideals of the Republic. Whether they want it or not, their new culture will be rooted in the colors they get from history, religion, and tradition. Our Kurds. Contentious issue. Is there a Kurdish question in Turkey? There is a Kurdish problem, is the major response. Perhaps there is a Turkish problem, others say. A wide circulation, a symbolic number. The saying goes as there are 22 ethnicities in Turkey. Another symbolism is the number of states Turks have founded in history, though much more, set to be 16, as symbolized in the presidential coat of arms. Our ethnic groups, including perhaps 2/3 of the Kurds, have voluntarily united under the banner of Turkishness since the founding of the Republic. Not just them either. Many of our non-Muslims converted to Islam and joined the Muslim community, and many of our Alevis became Sunnites in history. Then came the Republic with the assertion of creating a modern uniform nation. As it tries to format religious and ethnic groups into a single mold, it gets an equal resistance to the impact it made in assimilating them. Conservative, pious Sunni Turks resisting Westernism, Alevi Yoruks, and Kurds resisting national mix were seen as threats to the central bureaucracy for many years, as in Ottoman history. The issue then becomes, why did some Kurds refuse to participate or resist, while many of them and 22 other ethnic groups willingly, knowingly, and enthusiastically assimilated into Turkish identity? Let us see what the founding Dejremes of the Republic had in mind as creating a new nation-state from the ashes of the multi-ethnic Ottoman Empire. Initially, they thought of a new state of Muslims as a partnership of Turks and Kurds. Founders presented the Republic as a Turkish-Kurdish joint state after World War I, but later, seeing foreign manipulations to use Kurds against the new state, decided to dissolve the two ethnic groups into one Turkish identity. According to this policy and its offshoot, Lausanne Peace Treaty with Western countries, Turkey was a Muslim country, and non-Muslims were accepted as the minorities, namely Greeks, Jews, and Armenians. This policy was effective in the metropolises until the 1980s. The rhetoric of, I am an Istanbulian, born and raised in Istanbul, I am a Kemalist, I am an Islamist, helped the desire to be under the umbrella of Turkishness. With the acceleration of migration from eastern cities to the west, the assimilation capacity of the great metropolis collapsed, and when Erdogan came to power, he acknowledged the rights of Kurds as an ethnic reality of Turkey. Yet the problem continues. HDP, the representative party of the terrorist group PKK, getting about 10% of the votes, wants to declare Kurds as a minority of Turkey and tries to dictate special minority privileges, which the other 21 ethnicities do not claim. In reality, what they want is to go back to the Ottoman policies of letting ethnic and religious groups into their own lifestyles, ruled by their own local religious and community leaders. Yet, those policies of decentralization cannot work in a nation-state. As we said, the Ottoman regime was despotic in the sense that the people indeed had full freedom of lifestyle, but never, ever let them be involved in politics. Could the feeble republic, after an exhaustive war, afford such a luxury while building a new nation? Kurdish terror organization PKK talks of oppression of Kurds. Many a time, Dejreme rulers saw pious Muslims as a greater threat than the secularist, communist PKK, and tried to oppress the Islamist lifestyle as a greater threat than Kurdish independence efforts from Turkey. For many years, Alevi Turkmens too were seen as a threat to the central authority, a continuation of the historical schism. Although the periphery, without exception, all ethnic, Sunni, and Alevi groups suffered throughout history, including in the early republic. Today, only one part of the Kurdish population makes it an issue and wants to secede from Turkey. Such a wish cannot be realized without war, and that is what PKK is doing. It may have succeeded if Ottoman decomposition were to continue. They do not realize they have no chance, no matter how much American and European support they get. They are fighting against a vigorous young republic on the rise. Yes, the United Nations estimates may say there may be 250 member states by the year 2050. Nation states may decompose, and it may be possible for Britain, France, Spain, Germany, and Italy of feudal origin, but not for Turkey on the rise. As Kurds are distributed historically into many countries in the region, they may, like in northern Iraq, succeed in the long run to form their own nation state, but not in Turkey. Taking this opportunity, we should note that Kurds were banned from speaking Kurdish among themselves. No print in Kurdish, no songs to be played in Kurdish. Then came Tayyip Erdogan and recognized the human and democratic rights of these groups. Now, Turkey has legal Kurdish TV, media, and music peacefully enjoyed by all. Our Turkish language. We have emphasized above that language is the first element of our identity. It is the glue, medium of communication, sympathy, and mutual comprehension among the nation. Language barrier results in a mentality gap and a breakdown in communication. And it would not be an exaggeration to say that the communication barrier was perhaps the most important factor in the schism between the rulers and the ruled of the Ottoman Empire. This is why when the ruling Young Turks decided the movement of Halka Dogru, embrace the people, they felt compelled to simplify the Ottoman language to communicate with the Turkmen. As for the Turkish language, hailing from millennia, it is one of the most perfected languages, especially with its mathematical verb system. It is suitable for computers, mathematics, and logic, and formats practical intelligence in humans. It helps its users approach life not with a fuzzy mind, but with a fresh, vibrant mind, with an easy capacity for adaptation, rather than philosophical sophistication. While we were nomads on horseback, our main need in action was verbs. Hence, our language was predominantly verb-based. Then came settlement and the need for sophisticated nouns and adjectives. As we filtered from Asia steppes to Asia Minor through Persia, we were heavily influenced by Persian civilization and imported Persian words, and rooted words of the Persian language as well. A millennium later, we see the same practical, acquisitive spirit in Ataturk translating and adopting European laws in urgent need. Back to language. Words borrowed from Arabic and Persian enrich Seljuk and Ottoman imperial languages, especially where they were needed. Literature and official correspondence of the state. The point that draws attention here is that although there are complaints that Arabic and Persian terms have invaded our language, powerful Turkish grammar and Turkish verb system have remained as the base, and not succumbed to Arabic and Persian, which are again among the most powerful languages of the world. Although Persian and Arabic words also affected the Turkish of the nomad Turkmen, their complex forms could not penetrate the periphery. We can easily understand our great Sufi poet Yunus Emre of the 13th century, yet we, the new Turkish generations, cannot read and write the Ottoman elite language. Neither can we understand it. It was the language of a great civilization, like Latin. Now it is dead, and a field for academic studies. Interestingly, the Tanzimat Halka Dogru, Embrace the People movement, and the efforts of lifting the language barrier with the people veered off course in the Republic. With a new reinvigoration in the 1960s, the new fashion of pure Turkish went to levels of mania. Everybody, authority or not, started creating a so-called Turkish-rooted word, scientific or not, to replace an Arabic or Persian origin word. Trying to get rid of Arabic and Persian words from Turkish, judges wrote in the new nonsensical creations, a jargon which nobody understood. Legal terms in so-called pure Turkish created confusion and havoc. Deşarme class, the alien elite, could again find a special language to separate themselves from the people. Students could not understand school books written in the newly created nonsensical Turkish words. Those who studied in high school in the 1960s will, for example, remember logic textbooks for high schools, which also caused serious confusion. To sum up, for roughly 50 years, there was a communication gap between the Republican elite and the general public. Like any fashion, this crazy, ideological era eventually lost steam. As things calmed down, the pendulum came to a standstill, and modern Turkish, which we all speak today, settled in. This time, however, communication with the populations of the Turkish republics of Asia, who still kept Arabic and Persian words in a much milder form than the Ottomans did, was disrupted. Language of thought. The Ottoman language was indeed a language of thought and great literature, able to borrow words from Arabic and Persian anytime it needed a new concept. It had an ocean of vocabulary of 3 languages at its service. Modern, trim Turkish has just a percentage of that huge ocean. Hence, frankly speaking, Turkish thinkers of our day are the ones who can think in both Turkish and another rich language of the world. I hope I'm wrong. Here, I shall dare to accuse TDK, Turk Dil Kurumu, Turkish Linguistics Foundation, personally founded by Ataturk, still being funded in millions of liras from his estate. They failed to manage the pure Turkish orgy of the 1960s. In fact, poured gasoline on the fire with their non-scientific, ideological approach. Today, the greatest problem in the Turkish language is the problem of pronunciation. Because of the transformation from Arabic to Latin alphabet, many Arabic and Persian origin words cannot be written in correct phonemics. TV speakers, TV series artists, professors, and famous politicians and role models for young generations all make great blunders in pronunciation. For written grammar, I would challenge all of them to write a paragraph without major mistakes. The fact that their errors are not taken seriously demonstrates how poorly we care for the Turkish language, which is our mother tongue. Let's call it shortcomings of the Lumpen transition process in education. This chaos can only be fixed by a reform in education and by creating an atmosphere of love for our mother tongue, ostracizing and mocking the role models who make blunders in using our mother tongue. As for the Turkish Language Foundation, TDK, with millions of liras to spend on Ataturk's estate, it can send free experts who can serve as pronunciation coaches on television news stations and TV soap opera sets. They should also send experts to national newspapers. Spelling and grammar mistakes in newspapers are simply unacceptable. There should be no compromise with the editorial profession. Since universities are unsuccessful in educating our elite with adequate ability in our mother tongue, TDK may establish a special institution to train aspiring candidates for journalism and performing arts. A law can be passed imposing the rule: anyone without a certificate from such an institute cannot go on TV or on stage. Before closing our subject, it is worth noting a folly. Modern Deşarmes, hating Arabic and Persian words, are very happy to learn, use, and import English words into new Turkish, just as their young Turk ancestors learned, using and importing French words into the Ottoman language. Fashion of the day, is it not? Religion. Where does religion stand between the Deşarme and the Reaya? Let's look at the name Turkmen. Professor Ahmet Tajigil says Turks who become Muslims began to be called Turkmen. It's about the Oghuz, especially after the 880s, when the Oghuz started to become Muslims in the Fergana region, east of today's Uzbekistan. The name Turkmen was used for the first time. And Professor Goka again. Brother quarrel continued after the Turks converted to Islam and arrived in Anatolia, between Muslim Turks and non-Muslim Turks, and between Seljuks and Turkmens. schism between Madrasah Islam, Tekke Islam, official Islam. Folk Islam continued during the period of Anatolian Turkmen kingdoms. It's interesting to note that the Seljuk and later Ottoman governments who adopted Islam for Sunni Islam on the Turkmen and labeled those who disobeyed as infidels. 1,000 years later, the Republican regime made a 180-degree turn and started imposing French laicite on Sunnis, this time labeling the Sunni periphery as bigots. Thus, the Ottoman rupture between the state and the Rayaya became even more radical in the Republic. In response, the periphery, which is now Sunni, accused the positivist, materialist rulers of the Republic of being unfaithful. In other words, we see the center and the periphery constantly alienating one another in terms of religion and lifestyle. Today, as in history, we see a deep gap between the interpretations of religion among the ruling elite and the ruled. Ottomans trying to assimilate them, force the Alevi Turkmen to settle down and become Sunnites. Now, Republican elites who chose positivism and followed the Christian example of Europe interpreted both Sunnism and Alawism as personal psychological choices, pushed them from the public domain, and imprisoned them home. Jean-Paul Roux describes the Turkmen religion as being unique and a mix of monotheism and polytheism. In Turks, he says, folk religion and state religion have always been distinct from one another. Those who took control were the Sunnis, and the oppressed and despised, but venerated in wartime by their very kin, were the Shia Turkmen, the Karabudun, Black Nation, so to speak. They could manage to keep their own spiritual characteristics in Islam and keep the ancestral religion alive. Many Salafist Arabs assert that Turkish Islamic understanding is still under the influence of their pre-Islamic Central Asian beliefs. Villagers in rural Anatolia practice Islam in a much more liberal manner than in Istanbul, where religion becomes uniform and is applied in the mathematical discipline. Then who can blame the Anatolian rural Turk as a religious fanatic against such a historical background? There is a saying that goes, "There are as many Islams in the world as there are Muslims." Each person has his own unique idea of God. Every individual has his or her own conception of God and religion. If we do a little anthropology, who can say that the main issue for peasant women picking crops from sunrise to sunset in the field, in sweat and fatigue, would be which style they should tie their headscarf? Could the headscarf, a practice she has been using for thousands of years, be the main issue? The liberal religion that the Turkmen from the Asian steppes brought to the countryside is a peaceful and liberal Islam. As the village has plenty of time and space, the peasant needs no spiritual nor physical discipline there. Starting with the town, both space and time begin to be limited and require mental and physical discipline. An example of this in the 1950s was the use of force by officers on the peasant soldiers to impose physical discipline on conscripts in the army. Soldiers had to discipline their bodies, starting with turning left and right. Then came migration to the city. The city's demand for mental and physical discipline resulted in the standardization of the turban, or headscarf. A strict interpretation of modernity commanded a standardization like that of a soldier. There had to be only one standard way of tying the headscarf. The variety of the liberally worn headscarf ties in the village, for centuries, were no longer permitted in the standardized metropolitan Islam. Political manipulations on such logical turn have no value, just psychological manipulations. The new way of tying the headscarf was an attempt to conform to the absolute logic and discipline requirements of modernity. It's interesting to note that despite its vigorous efforts, the Republic was unable to format and standardize Islamic life, an understanding to suit its secular viewpoint. The Turkmen who entered the city, however, was successful in unifying, disciplining, and modernizing its Islamic lifestyle his own way. Let's also record Ishak Torun's interpretation of Weber here. However, in the process of motivating the world and economic life, religion has also prepared its own end by becoming secular. This is the ironic story of religion that has emptied itself and driven its soul away from itself. As Archimedes jumped out of the bath with his discovery of gravitation, the first to approach religion with a positivist outlook were the early secular engineers of the Republic, like the late President Özal and Prime Minister Erbakan. After a severely radical positivist education at Istanbul Technical University, they were the early ones to fall into an identity crisis in search of their spiritual roots. When they read the Quran with their engineer logic, their natural reaction was the literary interpretation of the book, which was seen as a radical understanding of Islam by the Deshirme rulers of the time. Engineers waking up to an identity crisis was a new beginning since Tanzimat, a questioning of Westernization, the supremacy of Western civilization, and laicism. Although intellectually not fully equipped to challenge the westernized Deshirmes, the wake-up trend quickly spread among the newly educated rural. This was not the traditional reaction of illiterate ignorance. The fire of reaction was lit by the best-educated kids of middle-class families. They were challenging the Western clones who were so sure of their supremacy against their ignorant peasants who needed to be westernized by themselves. A new era was beginning to dawn upon the century-old identity crisis. The Tanzimatist Deshirme bureaucracy reacted violently to these traitors that emerged from within. It was a frontal assault on the secular faith of Deshirmes. A group of brilliant engineers from Istanbul Technical University, one of the elite castles, dared to question modernity. In the beginning, the nonconformist engineers looked as if they did not have much chance in challenging Deshirmes, who had the full support of Europe and the USA. But the real issue was deep inside, an issue of identity. Deshirmes have been in an identity crisis for a century. They were bewildered between tradition and Western civilization. They had wholehearted faith in modernity, but this faith could not give them the peace of mind between their roots and what they aspired to. And the other group, the engineers, started to leave their literal interpretation of the Quran and gradually reach the synthesis of their understanding, modernity, and historical Anatolian liberal Islam. The pendulum swinging between matter and spirit came to a harmonious middle way. The trend of urbanization was grandmothers wearing a black chador, mothers sporting a coat and headscarf, girls without scarves, and some grandchildren from these families wearing bikinis. Western transformation may be a good example of Turkish transformation. Take Greco-Roman materialism turning into spiritualism in the medieval age, transforming into materialism with reform, Renaissance, and Industrial Revolution. Then the age of postmodernity and fuzzy logic. Take pre-Islamic Turks, then adopting the spiritual lifestyle of Islam, then the wake-up call of Tanzimat to the materialist world, and the radical swing of the early republic to secular materialism, a deep rift with the periphery. In 21st century, 93.2% of urban Muslims approaching the reasonable middle way, and the religious laicist quarrel, soothing. Remembering British philosopher Alfred N. Whitehead saying European philosophical tradition consists of a series of footnotes to Plato. Let's say religion tells the philosophers, you go round and round like a grindstone horse with no distance. A human is like a robot with 5 receptors and a processor. He cannot know beyond its receptor capacity. Likewise, the capacity of the processor is also limited. He cannot know of anything beyond what he can make sense of. Yet, a lovely explanation of philosophy, an enjoyable journey without a destination of disembarkation, and religion answers, I've come to save you from your unanswerable searches. Your brain is in a prison called life, and I've come to set it free so it can experience the freedom of eternity. I am beyond what your 5 senses and logic can comprehend. As we said before, there are fashions, including intellectual fashions, and some live for more than a century. For the Deshirmes, the intellectual fashion was religion, the culprit which kept the Ottomans behind Europe, and its leader, the Caliph Sultan, to be praised as a modern Western civilized person one has to be skeptical, nihilist, or at least keep a distance from religion. Otherwise, the mechanisms of inquisition and excommunication of our Westernist modernists would start working. Delving into a scientific inquiry, I kindly request your understanding for going into a little privacy. The most striking example of the religion-modernity conflict for the Turkish youth of the 1960s was pubic hair. Turkish cleaning customs include armpit and skirt shaving, both for males and females. Although the tradition was rooted out of religious prerogatives, it turned into more of a Turkish national tradition in historical sequence. Since the roots of body shaving were based on religion, the youth started abandoning this custom in the 1960s, fearing that they would be considered Islamists by the modernists. Parallel fears were of playing with worry beads and having beards. Anxiety was, if people at the beach don't see hair under my armpits, will they think I'm a peasant, a reactionary Muslim, or bigoted? They thought that letting body hair grow was a necessity of civilization, leaving hair in the armpit, but not knowing deodorant use, to rub stool with toilet paper on long black hair instead of using water after toilet, and not have the habit of taking a shower after it. The fears and complexes of a generation that had not yet matured to face the accusations of the Westerners fueled this unbelievable, nonsensical approach to what was considered civilized behavior. Before closing the issue of some of our young people's anxiety about looking modern, let's record another logic game that will make Descartes do somersaults in his grave. Logically, rubbing toilet paper on the back may leave some stool stain on back hair. Now, this is the point of deciding who should enter public pools in France. French authorities assert that hijab is unsafe, against hygiene and health in pools. So come the homework. A clean body versus a dry clean body. Which is more eligible to enter the pool? Even these illogical examples will not quench the inferiority complexes of some of our obsessed ones who will support this absurdity. Let us wrap up the discussion of religion with 4 quotations from Errol Goka. Ones who grasped power were Sunni, whereas the oppressed and despised by the rulers of his own lineage were generally the Shia, just to be remembered in times of war. Yet they were able to add their own spiritual characteristics to Islam, and somehow were able to keep their ancestral religion vibrant. According to Chulku, one of the most important events in Ottoman history was the murder of Chandarli Halil Pasha of Kalenderi or Ahi origin, with the influence of Deşirme Pashas, because this event represents the rapid shift of the Ottoman central administration and state policy towards an Arab Islamic Sunni line of bigotry. After this date, the office of Seyhul Islam, a Byzantine institution, will enter the Ottoman palace. A new tension will begin between the Orthodox center and the Turkmen circles, which are close to the heterodox current. As the heterodox authority created by the Safavid state influenced the Turkmen, the central authority's attitude towards them became harsher. But the Janissaries, who shared the same beliefs with the Turkmen, became more and more grumpy. In order to centralize and legitimize its power, the ruling clan adopts a belief system acceptable to all members of the community. Other tribes, creating centrifugal forces, insist on old beliefs and lifestyles and try to resist the center. Thus, a national religion and a folk religion distinction emerged that constantly produced the mafiosi society structure, which would feed continuous fratricidal strife. These esoteric movements gained more power during the Crusades and Mongol invasions. On the one hand, there was the official Sunni Madrasa Islam, and on the other hand, popular piety, influenced by esoteric beliefs and botanism prevalent among the nomadic and peasant elements and in the lower strata of the cities. The Babai resurrection of Babas, who combined shamanic and Shiite beliefs with the belief of the Mahdi, emerged on this ground. The distinction between Madrasa Islam, Teki Islam, official Islam, folk Islam continued in the period of principalities. Undoubtedly, there are many other factors in the evolution of the Ottoman Empire towards such a behavior, but it is most likely that they, like other ruling tribes in Turkish history, felt the obligation to choose a foreign religion, lifestyle, and management system in order to manage the Turkish communities under their rule, which we have been underlining since the beginning. The need for dogma. Flashback to the radical materialism of medical students of the 19th century, we can discuss religion as dogma. How the human brain shall find sound judgment in the freedom of unrestrained and irresponsible functioning is an important issue for philosophers and theologists. As humans love the freedom of wandering in the endless oceans of thought, they occasionally need a solid, tranquil, all-encompassing harbor to seek refuge in. That port is an absolute, unquestionable dogma. Religions and ideologies both attempt to fill this need. All of them, though, are products of the human brain, so they evolve over time. At this point, the Quran stands out from the others. Non-Muslims assert that the Quran was compiled after the Prophet and may have changed, similar to earlier religious texts. Some deists and atheists among our Deshermes also agree with this claim. The claims that the book was changed are only a reference to the period until it was compiled. From the moment the book was compiled, there can be no claim of change because there is only one verse. We brought it down. We will protect it. It is a declaration that the Quran has not changed for 1,500 years and will not change. Why did we choose this subject? LGBTQ rights are a hot topic right now. Discussions about sex and nudity are as old as humanity itself. Images of police taking measurements of swimsuit lengths on US beaches in the 1930s can be our discussion starter. We can also recall how women dressed in medieval Europe. From pagan homosexuality and nudity in ancient Athens and Rome, to medieval covering, and then to modern homosexuality and nudity, we observe a cycle. This cycle serves as a reminder that societies, like individuals, can go through rebellious adolescent periods and try to prove themselves. Through this lens, we can assess the socio-psychological boom times in the areas of women's rights, LGBTQ rights, sex, nudity, etc. Of course, in these discussions, it is important in which periods of history and in which geographies the change took place. Will Turkish modernity follow the same course as the veiled Europe of the Middle Ages, evolved into the Europe of nudist and LGBTQ camps today? What role does this opening play in the claims and aspirations of our people who seek to leave behind the agrarian lifestyle, elevate themselves to the bourgeoisie, modernize their lives, and demonstrate their freedom? How much will they feel like adults and free once the psychology of rebellion is satisfied? As the human spirit has been blunted by materialist education and people seeking solace in yoga salons, mental health clinics, and Eastern spiritualist philosophy, does it tell us something that they may be after? An unchanging harbor to take refuge in? Could that harbor be religion again? Law. According to Errol Gungor, a nation's laws ought to be officially recognized codes of that community's morality. When laws clash with the ethical norms of a society, people shall be compelled to violate one of the two. In the age of the rise, the Ottoman legal system was remarkably just and effective, providing security and justice to non-Muslims as well as Muslims was part of the social contract that the state had with its subjects. Inadequacies and corruption emerged with the decline, especially with the introduction of modernity in the 19th century. It is interesting to note that in the Ottoman provinces, the Qadi, provincial judges, were the class that defended the populace from the oppression of the central Desherme bureaucracy. The Republic, ending the duality of center and periphery in jurisdiction, put an end to this protection. The founders of the new Republic saw that the Ottoman legal system was archaic, bankrupted, ineligible for a modern nation-state. Out of desperation, they opted for a hasty translation and implementation of foreign laws. It was against science, yet, for them, the only option. But the Desherme class, who were to enforce those laws, was more important. Direct translation of foreign laws plus verdicts of judges foreign to the people and its values, were contrary to the realities of Turkey. This is why Mesut Yilmaz, the late Prime Minister, was saying that you cannot apply EU laws in the eastern town of Diyarbakir, a very pious city, and declining self-confidence of Deşarme jurists against the threat of rising periphery. The appointment of a CHP lawyer named Yekta Güngör Özden to the presidency of the Constitutional Court. Next comes CHP Justice Minister Mehmet Mogultay. I got a government decree to recruit 5,000 judges. Should I have given these cadres to MHP and RP instead of giving them to my party? An exemplary mentality of the legal level of Turkey in the 1990s. At that time, the justice mechanism, which had nothing to do with the people and their values, was working perfectly within the homogeneity of the Deşarme tradition, and there was no reason for CHP to worry about it falling into opposition hands. There are many today who look for those good old days. Later, Fito saw that the courthouse was a much more effective weapon than the military as a means of seizing power, and it really seized it. When the military courts were closed and the officers were tried by civilian courts, the imprisonment of the officers by the Fito prosecutors was considered a consolation and relief for the oppressed religious people, especially the headscarved ones, who were wailing under pain of the military coups, and led them to look at Fito with sympathy against the military. Especially those wearing headscarves despaired of the ultra-laicist justice practices, sought refuge in the mercy of Christian European judges, and became enthusiastic about Turkey's EU membership. July 15th, People's Revolution, was also of historical importance for the transformation of Turkish justice. Disconnected from the people and alien to its values, the judges did not suddenly, but gradually, begin to approach the values of the people, to find a balance between justice, the old and the new mentality, and to get rid of the lumpen Kemalist ideology. The CHP could not accept this new situation and began to declare that the justice that reconciled with the values of the people was getting away from Kemalist principles and starting to support the AKP. The reality was that people who put the AKP in its service were now putting justice in its service, asking it to approach its values instead of alien values to Anatolian culture. At this point, we can ask whether judges fear political power. When I completed my law internship in the 1970s, a rumor started to circulate among the interns. A young judge was assigned to the East, where quasi-feudal order was still of relevance. The following day, a local lord knocked on the young judge's door and placed a gun and a bag of money on the table, telling the young judge to make a choice. The young judge asked for 2 days to think and fled the town right away. Naturally, the next question is, which option would he have chosen if he hadn't managed to flee? If he had surrendered, wouldn't he have been exposed to blackmail throughout his career? If a person has justice in his soul, he can make just decisions in accordance with reason and conscience, even if he is estranged from the people and their values. That is why the affinity of candidates is not questioned in hiring judges. However, character analysis of a candidate judge is impossible with current personnel techniques. A candidate with a weak character is a lifelong subject to blackmail, which is a significant disadvantage for law.